I guess one of the worst feelings in life is feeling like your circumstances are beyond your control. That there's things going on in your world that you just can't change, you can't fix. You almost feel like a victim and you're helpless. And after the fires came through, the Sarsfield community started gathering at the community hall on a Friday night. And we, Red Gum Church, put our hands up to feed nearly 200 people this night. And some of you were there, and we put this barbecue on for the community. And I can remember talking to one lady, and I was talking with her, and she shared how she had lost everything, her house, everything was gone. I said, well, what's one thing that we could do? There's got to be one thing that we could do that would help you. And she said, I would love a little electric chainsaw. And she said, the reason I would love it is because all the men come in with their big machinery and have been cleaning up. She said, but if I had a little chainsaw, I would feel like I could fight back against what the fire's done. I can make a difference. It would give me a sense of power and not being a victim. So we bought her a little chainsaw and delivered it to her the next day. We didn't just buy her a chainsaw, we gave her something so much more powerful than a chainsaw. And I want to come back to that thought. I want to pick that thought back up in a little bit. But first, I want to have a look at a really weird, strange little story that happened in the life of Jesus. And it's weird and it's a bit strange because we don't understand the culture or the religious or political moments at that time when Jesus did what he did. And there was a sense of prophetic imagery. It had to do with the nation of Israel. But what happened was Jesus is walking along with the boys. It's early morning and he's hungry. And he sees a fig tree. And it's got lots and lots of leaves on it. And he thinks, I'm going to go find myself some figs. Now, the twist in the story is that it wasn't fig season. But when there are no figs, Jesus sprinkles supernatural, supercharged, double strength Roundup on this thing, and it just shrivels up and dies. It's not very Christian, really. It's not caring for our environment. It's not loving trees. And he cursed this thing and said, may you never produce fruit. Now, you don't need to understand the whole story and why that happened to get the point of what I'm trying to bring out this morning. What I want us to look at is the disciples' response to that and Jesus' response then to the disciples. And the disciples, their reaction was amazement and wonder, and they asked what seems like an obvious question. They said, Jesus, how come the fig tree just shriveled up so quickly? And I want to read you what Jesus said in response to them. But before I can do that, which is in verse 21 of Matthew chapter 21, I've got to read you verse 22. Now, verse 22 is not the answer he gave, but it's connected. And it's connected with a little word. And the King James uses it. The New King James uses this one little word. But the NIV just throws it away, which I think is a mistake. And this little word that connects these two verses in Jesus' response to the disciples' question is this. It's the word and. It's a Greek word. It's a Greek word that actually is pronounced kahi. But it means also. It means as well as. And Jesus, in verse 22, was adding another thought on top of his answer. He was giving them something extra that was connected to it, but was important to also understand. And so this is what Jesus said in verse 22. He said this, "And whatever things you ask in prayer, believing, you'll receive." We hear that and we think we know what Jesus was saying. But I want to just for a moment unpack those words. What I did was I went through every single word and found what it really means. And so I want to just go through this just for a moment, and this is what it says. And whatever things, that means daily things. The word means uncertain things, possibilities. Whatever's going on in your life right now, the daily stuff. Jesus is saying, ask in prayer. And the most important word in that start of the verse is the word in prayer. Because the word in is this incredible word because it's a position that you take, that you find yourself in. It's actually the Greek word that is translated in this situation, it means a place of rest. And it's not a direction you're taking, it's a position of rest where no effort's involved. And when Jesus is saying about ask in prayer, it's ask without striving, without predetermining the direction that prayer's going. It's resting in God. It's not your effort. And then he says, believing, that's simply trust. You know, when we did this series on asking, seeking, knocking, we got to a place at the end of that where Jesus told a story about a dad, an earthly dad. And he said, even if earthly dads are evil, how much more does your Heavenly Father want to do good things for you? So just believing that God is for you is critical. It's so important. Like, if I believe someone likes me, I don't mind inviting myself to their house for a meal. But if I think they don't like me, I'm not going to ask. And so asking, there's a belief, there's got to be a confidence that God's for you, that he wants to do good things. And then Jesus says, you'll receive. And this word receive that we translate from the Greek to the English word receive, it's a fascinating word because it sits between two extremes. When Jesus is saying you will receive, it fits between this passive, like I asked, where is it? And this other side, this other extreme that's aggressive, that says I've asked and I'm just going to make it happen with or without God. And so this word, when Jesus says you'll receive, it's like a cricket player and you're in the outfield and you want to catch the ball and get the opponent out. And the ball is hit in the air and you're standing there, and this word receive, the passive version that we got to avoid is like, well, I can't reach it. I'm not going to catch it. Or the aggressive side is the ball's up in the air and you just go running and you knock over all your teammates. You kill half the team trying to take this spectacular catch that you miss anyway. And so receive is this, God, I want to receive from you, but I'm not going to be passive and I'm not going to be over the top aggressive, but I'm going to receive. And so last Sunday, because this is prayer, the series we've just done, this is about prayer. And in this verse 22, Jesus is talking about prayer in response to the boy's question, why'd the fig tree shrivel up? Last Sunday, Mitch came up to me and I've asked if I could share this. And do you know what Mitch said to me? He said, Lex, after we've been doing this series on prayer, I've given it a try. He said, I started to pray. He said, not a wish list, I just started talking to God. And he said, and I could see last week, Mitch is at his dad's place, is his dad's birthday this week, and he's away this week. I was going to get Mitch to share this. But he looked so different last Sunday. He had this lightness about his face. And he says, Lex, it's because I started to talk to God. And then I spoke to him on Monday, and he said, Lex, I've had the best day ever for weeks and weeks, just because I've been praying. And prayer that we've been looking at is this asking, seeking, knocking. And it's very different to the answer Jesus gave why the fig tree withered up. When I was in Sydney 3 weeks ago and I got out of hospital, I'm coming back, it's about just over 2 weeks ago, and I had to call in at someone's place to get a couple of birds from them. I was in Coral's car, so I'm going to blame Coral, right? Her car is, the last bit of the fuel gauge goes tick, 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 and you're out of fuel. And the computer shuts off and you're done. You're out of fuel. Well, I wasn't looking at the fuel gauge, was I? Because my ute, its fuel gauge talks to me. Coral's car, I don't look at fuel gauges. And I'm run out of fuel. Somewhere between Goulburn and Canberra. And I rang up the person whose place I was calling at. She's on a little farm. And I said, have you got any fuel? Because I'm out of fuel. And she says, what, petrol? I said, no. And she said, no, we've only got diesel here. There's no petrol. I said, haven't you got something in a lawnmower can? You know, just something I can sprinkle on it that'll make it get me to Canberra. She said, no, we've got nothing. So I'm out of fuel. I drive in her driveway and I stop this little cottage and she comes out and I said, oh, how many acres you got here? She said, oh, we don't own it. We manage it. My husband manages it. We've got 9,000 acres. And she said, I just remembered, over there, and she points, she said, see that? There's 2 petrol bowsers, like proper, genuine petrol bowsers, 9,000 acre property. It's got all their staff runs it. There's buildings everywhere. It's huge. There's a diesel pump. There's a petrol pump. And husband comes over, how much do you want? Yeah, no, it's fills up my tank. I had prayed as I'm driving in the driveway, God, make this petrol last. You know what Christians do? You see the gauge and go, God, just make it, we'll still get there, right? I didn't know how God was going to do it, but in prayer, I had a confidence that I would. Coral didn't have the confidence. She's saying, you idiot. And she's saying, you're going to have to call in at every farm you find along the way and find someone that's got petrol. Well, the first place I drive in has a petrol bowser. I don't know how many farms you've been to that has a petrol bowser, right? That's prayer. But I didn't know how, and I didn't have a confidence in the answer. I just had a confidence in God. But that is not the answer that Jesus gave the boys when they asked, why did this fig tree wither up? The answer he gave them was a chainsaw. It was the power to fight back against circumstances beyond your control, beyond our control. And the answer he gave them wasn't just for their sake, it's for our sake today. To know that we don't have to be the victim of the circumstances that are happening right now in our life. So now I'm going to read you. Yeah, it's a long way around we got there, right? But now I'm going to read you the answer Jesus gave them. There's Matthew 21, verse 21. And he says, I tell you the truth. Whenever you hear Jesus say that, you know, we are going to feel a pushback to what he's saying. We're not going to believe him. That's why he says, I'm telling you the truth. Because we're going to struggle with it. They did, we do. And this is what he said. If you have faith and don't doubt, you can do things like this and much more. You can even say to this mountain, may you be lifted up and thrown into the sea, and it will happen to you. That's... I thought it was on silent. Anyone who wants to get embarrassed, just leave your phone on. It's a mate of mine. I nearly answered it and spoke to him and embarrassed him, but I thought I won't do that because I get into trouble from Coral when I do that. So Jesus' answer to them was not an answer to pray. The answer was not prayer. The answer was an authority and a power over our circumstances. It's the capacity to change what is impossible to change. And immediately after verse 21, which is this chainsaw answer he gave them, something to fight back with, and immediately after verse 22, which was talking about prayer again, comes verse 23. And Matthew records in verse 23, straight after these statements of Jesus, that the religious leaders said to Jesus these words, by what authority are you doing these things? Who gave you this delegated authority? It's a great question. I want to put a photo up right now of someone you may or may not know. So can we put that up? Thanks, Chris. Yep. Now, I want you to focus on the young person who's the horse in the photo. I don't know if you can see them properly, but they're carrying the jouster. This is our youth program years ago, and so that's a jousting competition. So the young person bent over there is the horse, right? Now, I want to talk to you about that young person. That young person in our youth was one of the most quiet, mild-mannered Clark Kents you'd ever met. Never really said boo. But he made a lifetime career decision to make a difference in his life, that he wanted to help people. And he wanted to help people in a significant way. And his way of serving our community and serving the needs in our community was this. We've got the camera person following me. Was to become a serving police officer. And this uniform changes everything about this person. Can I have a photo of that person on their graduation day up on the screen? Thanks. He's now Senior Constable Ray Finch. And just this uniform has no power by itself. And when Ray, as a civilian, is just without the uniform, it's just Ray. But when you combine the two, you have a person that has the highest authority in our land, and that authority, that delegated authority, is backed up by our courts, our legal system, our government. And as a serving police officer, he has power that he doesn't have when he doesn't have that uniform. And when Jesus was answering the boys the question, he was giving us an authority to function in. He was giving us a badge, a uniform. He was giving us a chainsaw that we could step into situations with deputised authority, and we can actually change things in our world. When I was talking to Sarah, his wife, about doing this and seeing what Ray thought about the idea, my little granddaughter Brooklyn's listening, and I somehow used the word authority, and she said to me later after the phone call, she says, "What does authority mean, Granddad?" And I said, "Well, If you walk out the end of our driveway and put your hand up with those big Bonacord trucks coming past and want them to stop, they're probably just going to run over you. But if you had one of these things on, you can walk out in front of a truck and they're going to stop. That's the difference, isn't it? And so when Jesus was talking about authority, he's giving us a tool that's delegated from him to us. Jesus was walking into a small town called Nain. And as he's approaching, he's got a whole mob of people around him. It's noisy and it's fun. It's adventure. And coming out of the town of Nain is a funeral procession. And there's a young boy, the only son of a widow. He's died. And you have a procession of life and a procession of death coming. And then when he left, he said to us that all authority on earth had been given to him. And he commissioned us and he gave us authority to go. And after Jesus had left planet Earth, Peter and John are rocking up to the temple where they've been before. And this person was begging. We have people on the streets in Australia that beg and ask for support. But when I was in Mexico, and I went into a small place in Mexico, and I had someone begging from me that was different to anything I experienced in Australia, it changed me. That lady begging because she had no other options, it did something inside of me that day. And this person, when they're begging to Peter and John, asking for, they had this response. They said, we haven't got any of that silver and gold, but what we have, we're going to give that to you. That we can give to you. And this is what they said. In the name of Jesus the Nazarene, who deputized us, get up and walk. They didn't pray. They didn't ask God to do a miracle. They just took an authority that had been deputized to them and spoke it into existence. When Jesus said about the fig tree, when he gave them the chainsaw, he says, if you have faith and do not doubt. In that whole spiel Jesus gave them, there's two really important words. When it comes to prayer, the two important conditions are asking with shameless audacity and believing God is for you. They're the two conditions. But see, to operate in this area of authority, the two conditions are different. You need to have something and not be doing something. And to have something is to have faith. But the important word in that is not the word faith. It's the word have. And it's not the sense of, if I asked you, Steve, do you have a car at home? Do you own a car? You'd say, I own thousands of cars. It changes every week. Depends what deal I can do, right? But do you have a car? Yes, you have a car. But when it says have faith, it's not something you own and belong. It's not a box you tick, yes, I have a car. It's something completely different. And as I'm doing the research on this, I found someone gave a description of the word have that was like, it's something fragile. It's like if you've ever seen someone make fire with a flint and a little ball of fluffy stuff, and you flint the little spark into it, and then you're holding it, and it's so precious, and you're trying to bring life to it. That's the sense of what this means, to have faith. it's still fragile. It's like a tiny life. But then I wasn't satisfied with that as what the word have means. And so I spent 3 hours digging and digging and digging until I found really what the word have faith means. And the word have, the Greek word is the word echo. And it means this, and I was blown away when I found this out. It has to do with our identity. To have faith has everything to do with the identity of who we see ourselves. Having faith, it's everything to do with identity. See, when Ray puts this uniform on, he doesn't question his identity. He becomes a serving police officer. And he functions as a serving police officer. There's no question. His identity is not, he's not pretending to be a police officer. He is. It's genuine. And our identity is from the highest authority in the universe as adopted sons and daughters of a king. It's this, it literally means, this is what the Greek word literally means. It's all things that collectively define who you are. Have faith. Identity. And the word don't doubt. 2 parts to this authority. Our identity and not doubting. The opposite of faith is not the word doubt. The word doubt means to not judge what God's doing. Not to take a position where you think, I'm superior to God. God's not doing it how I thought he's not doing. When I thought he would doing it, he's not doing the answer how I thought he would. And we start to withdraw from God. We separate and we discern what God's doing and we think he's doing it badly. That's what the word doubt means. So to operate in authority, it's all about our identity. Peter writes in 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 9, he says these words, "You're a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's special possession." That's us. That's our identity. Not just priests where we can function in that role, but in a royal role as leaders, as kings. Like God sees us so differently than we see ourselves. And our identity will determine the authority that we walk in. And not doubting, not setting ourselves above God and judging what he does is so critical. And I want to share, as I finish up, a couple of examples that I've walked through in my life. A number of years ago here in Bairnsdale, we had a youth girl that came to me and she said, one of the teachers at the high school he would just like walk past her in the classroom and he'd just slap her on the backside. And she said it made her feel really, really yucky. And she said, what do I do? And I said, well, why don't you go to the principal and have a talk to the principal? Which she did, but in the meeting that was set up, this teacher was also there and another teacher, and they made her feel so much like she was lying, that she was making something up. He explained it away as accidentally touching her, and she came away feeling worse than when it even began, that she wasn't believed. And when she told me, I can remember I was standing somewhere outside on the school oval somewhere, and after she walked away, something rose up inside of me. And this school teacher had had a big influence in the youth culture of Bairnsdale. They were on lots of committees and they were like a try-hard young person when they're older. And they just always wanted to be influenced the youth of our community. And something really rose up inside of me. And I can remember I was by myself and I said, God, that's it. That's the last time this person is going to have influence in the youth in this community. And I just took an authority and I spoke against his influence over this generation. He never suddenly left town, but it was like his influence just disappeared. The system wouldn't deal with him. But when I, as a deputised son of the living God, took authority over this person, it's just like he faded away. And up until then, he had had so much influence. And I saw God's power at work through this little black duck getting to a place where enough's enough. And another time when I found how this works was in Sydney. And we'd been living in Sydney for a long time, and I had this one line of dogs that I'd had since I was 16 years of age. They're hunting dogs. They're big, like a big rough-haired greyhound. And I was down to one, but I'd had this same line of dogs all these years, and I had this dream that one day, ever, if I come back to Bairnsdale, I'm going to bring this dog with me and I'm going to get some greyhounds, I'm going to breed them together, I'm going to breed these supercharged hunting dogs. And then this one dog called Lucky got really, 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 really sick. Can you put a photo up, thanks, Chris, of Lucky? And so I've seen a lot of death with animals. I fight disease and death in birds, in animals my whole life. I've seen a lot of animals die, hundreds and hundreds. And he was on a drip, he was vomiting, had diarrhea, but everything we were doing, we were losing the battle. And this had happened after day after day after day. And it was a Wednesday night, and I took this photo because I was convinced that he'd be dead in the morning. And when I went to bed, I knew he would be dead. I knew. But about midnight, when I went to bed, something started stirring inside of me. And I can't explain it fully, but it was like a fight going on inside. And I got to a position of authority where I spoke against death and disease. And something happened in that struggle within me that night. And when I got up in the morning and opened the bathroom door, I absolutely expected him to be alive. But I went to bed thinking he'd be dead. And I was going to be right. And I was just as right when I opened the door. And he'd turned the corner. It still took a few days, but Lucky lives. Can you put up another photo, Chris? So that's Lucky today. And I have bred him to some greyhounds. And can you put the next little bit of video up? Thanks. These are some of his kids. Some of my dogs that I have. Right? Now, I could never have had those dogs if Lucky had died. He was the secret sauce. He was the genetics. If I lost him, I lost the dream. I couldn't replace it. And I've sold dogs all around Australia, and nobody gets the dogs that I breed are better than anyone's. And it's all because of Lucky. But it's all because of a sense of authority that God gives us to operate in. And it comes in so many different ways, this way God wants us to operate. Different circumstances. When we were living in Sydney, there was a family round the corner, and we'd put a lot of work into their son's life. And he was always struggling with thoughts of suicide. And we'd get him to youth one night, and he'd go home really happy, and then I would get a phone call at 1:30 in the morning because he's on Facebook wanting to take his own life in his own bedroom. And more than once, I would knock on his parents' door and get them up out of bed and say, your son's wanting to take his life in his bedroom. And his parents were not Christians. In fact, his dad had also been shot and stabbed in a drug deal that had gone wrong. His two sisters both had 2 children by the time they were 18, both of them. He'd grown up in a very rough, tough world. And his parents were far from God, but they said to me, what can we do for our son? Because it's like he comes home okay and he goes to his bedroom and suddenly he wants to end his life. What can you do? I said, well, we could take an authority because there's something not right in your home. He says, yeah, he said, we've got evil stuff happens in this house. And he started telling me about some of the evil stuff that they'd experienced. They said, well, would you be happy if we got some Christians and we came and took authority over the evil stuff in your house? And we did. And we prayed over rooms. I had someone come that loved this stuff. She just loved praying over this stuff. And she went outside. She was going to pray over every single part of this house. And there's a back veranda, a low back veranda, and she found a little hole beneath the veranda, and she's got her head down in this hole praying over this stuff. I forgot to tell her about this Staffy dog they had. And when its nose and her nose met in the dark, and she's praying over these evil things, she had a whole new experience to praying over, But from that day forward, Tyson's parents told me everything changed when we took authority over whatever was going on in that house. This is meant to be normal. The examples I'm giving, it's just normal. It's just normal. It's the uniform we're to wear. It's the badge. It's the authority that God gives us. And I want to spend some more time next week on how we get to walk in that and what it looks like. But that's it for today. And thank you, band. You're patiently waiting in the background there and rushing up now. And I'm just going to pray as they come. God, I thank you that you didn't leave us victims, that we're not helpless, that you gave us a chainsaw to fight back with, and it's called your deputised authority. And it's meant to be the normal way we do life as Christians. And yet so often we don't. We struggle with the stuff that overwhelms us. And we cry out in prayer and it's like nothing happens. And yet prayer is not the answer. Prayer was not the answer to the shriveled up fig tree. It was an authority. An authority. And Jesus, you said it wasn't how big that faith is, that we could start with something tiny like a mustard seed. It wasn't the size, it was the life in the seed. It was the potential for its growth. It's not where we start, but it's starting that's really important. And so, God, as we look at this next week and as this builds, I pray, Father, that you would open our capacity to receive and see and run with your ways of doing life. Thank you, Jesus. Yeah.